pals. It's your old pal, Krampus, also known as Heavy Metal Santa Claus!
OMG! We have reached the end of yet another year, John. The weather outside, it's truly frightful. But the fires of hell, burning ever more brightly every single day, they're just so fucking delightful. And however goes things for my beloved co-host?
You know, as an academic person, we are barely hanging on at this time of year, but the end is in sight.
It sure is. It probably goes without saying that I am more of a Halloween dude than a Chrismukkah dude. And normally I wouldn't be particularly inclined to call this the most wonderful time of the year. But this year is different. You see, this year I get to fulfill something of a lifelong dream. I get to spread the gospel, the good news, if you will, about one of my very most favorite bands of all time. John, today we're going to sit ourselves in front of the fire, sip upon some bourbon-spiked cocoa, and talk about the formative years of the criminally underappreciated 90s alt-metal masters, Warrior Soul. Yeah! JM, could there possibly be a better way to pass a chill winter's eve?
You know, there's a football game on right now that I kind of have on in a secondary screen off to the side. I feel like a little fire. I'm with you on the bourbon spiked cocoa, but maybe fire, football, drinks could potentially be more enjoyable than what you're about to subject me to.
Fuck you! Well, I'm profoundly excited. Because in the early 1990s, there was no band in all the land that meant more to me than did Warrior Soul. In fact, here is a related Eric biographical fun fact. The only fan letter I have ever written in my entire preposterously long life was written to Warrior Soul's frontman, the great Corey Clark. As a teenager, I penned a day-in-the-life epistle to Mr. Clark detailing all the trials and tribulations of a young metalhead. Alas, I never actually sent the letter, and I have no idea what ever actually happened to it, but I sure did write it. Now, John, I am assuming that the bedroom of your youth was just littered with fawning, unsent fan letters addressed to the many metal superstars of yesteryear, no?
I mean, not only is that inaccurate, there weren't even letters to, like, the music I did listen to, because they were all dead.
Alrighty then. Before we get to getting, we should probably make sure that our proverbial gingerbread house is in order, and remind the nice people, currently bursting with holiday generosity, I am sure, how it is they can support this beloved heavy metal podcasting institution. John, be a darling and remind the people of the things.
Well, we do truly appreciate our listeners and wish all of you a very happy holiday season. If you'd like to show additional support for this show, you can join our Patreon page for just $3 a month. You'll get both access to exclusive content and also the deep satisfaction that comes from supporting arguably the single greatest program in the entire history of media. The link to our Patreon is in the episode notes. Ratings, reviews, and shares are also always appreciated, and all of this goes a long way towards helping to get the word out about what it is we do here.
Additionally, we always love to chat with all of you. Send us a holiday greeting or just say hiya via email, social media, or voicemail. All of those links also can be found in the episode notes. Thanks, as always, for listening. Without you, this would be just two weirdos speaking blithering nonsense into the infinite, darkened void. Okay, then. It's time. Yay! Now, John, the following thought does not originate with me. However, it is a central thesis underpinning today's episode, and I thought I might share it with you. Had things shaken out just a tiny bit differently, it absolutely would have been Corey Clark and Warrior Soul leading the entire heavy music world into and through the alt-1990s, and not Kurt Cobain and Nirvana. John, this was the road not taken by rock culture in the 1990s. Warrior Soul were in fact perfectly situated to be the biggest band in the fricking world. Now, is your mind blown or is your mind fucking blown?
You know, context is king in these kinds of statements, and I'm afraid I just have no context for the claim you just made.
Mm-hmm. You lack a sufficient understanding of the cultural moment that was the early 1990s. Is that not true?
That is accurate.
All right. Well, you willing to just roll with me on this?
I mean, you started by saying this wasn't even your thought. So for me, that's the closest we've come to scholarly research in this podcast, so I'll take it as a jumping off point.
Nice. I appreciate that. I do. You know, Clarence, John, there are some times when I wish the band Nirvana had never been born. And in that alternate reality, I imagine that I would discover both the incredible power of friendship and family in the making of a life, and also that Warrior Soul was, in fact, truly intended by destiny to be the voice of a generation. Also, I imagine that in that alternate reality, Kurt Cobain would probably still be alive and well and living a peaceful and productive life somewhere up in the Pacific Northwest. So for my money, I think this seems like a real win-win, no?
Alas, you do not write the story, my friend.
Never have truer words been said. But if I did, people would read that shit. They'd be like, damn.
Yeah, baby.
Alas, I get it. I know. Clearly, this is not the way things played out. The past is fixed. It is what it is. And we need to accept that things shook out in the way that they did. Nirvana and their grunge brethren tore the pop cultural mantle away from my beloved heavy metal bands. And Warrior Soul never managed to do too much more than place some dark, angsty videos onto MTV's Headbangers Ball, and to impress the ever-loving hell out of myself and a few of my closest friends when we were but young lads. Fine. No takesies backsies. Regardless, Warrior Soul was a band that truly did possess within them some culture-shaking potential. As such, I believe that we owe it to them and to our beloved listeners to go back in time and to take an expansive and thought-provoking tour through the early history and discography of one of the greatest should-have-beens in all of heavy metal history. John, it's Christmas, and Hanukkah, and Kwanzaa. So is it okay by you if we do that?
If I say no, are we gonna not?
I mean, it'll be weird. I don't have a plan B, let's just put it that way.
So I guess we better go ahead.
Great. Heavy Metal 101 listeners, John! And you too, annoyingly cute little girl who insists on talking incessantly about bells and angels. Won't all of you please join me as we, through the unhallowed powers of dark holiday season magic, spiked hot cocoa, and the ritually cursed blood of our fallen enemies, travel backwards in time and also geographically to the greatest city in the world.
The year is 1987. The location, the Isle of Manhattan. More specifically, 101 Avenue A at the Pyramid Club, a venue then known as the fertile breeding ground for artsy, politically inclined drag performers, post-punks, and the no-wave music and art scene.
John, is there anywhere on Earth cooler to be than at an avant-garde artsy nightclub in Alphabet City in New York City in the mid-1980s?
No, sure. You can have this one.
Yes! Thanks, buddy.
Tonight is a particularly special night at the Pyramid Club. A young drummer/performance artist, newly relocated from Detroit, Michigan, will be performing his scathing and politically charged spoken word performance art here this evening. The name of the show? Corey Clark, Warrior Soul.
Fun fact! The name Warrior Soul was derived from an obscure TV program detailing the life of General George S. Patton, who had always been a particular object of fascination for Corey Clark. John, this is so exciting! I feel like pretty much the only thing that you enjoy more than heavy metal is spoken word poetry and performance art, right?
Well, I mean, you got me there. You got me there.
Oh, shh, it's starting. Let's listen in on what such a thing might, perhaps, have sounded like.
Sitting again seems like forever. I know we are good. It doesn't feel hot. I'm totally calm. Always keeping an eye out for undercover. Feels like a very cool day. But I wait in dismal Detroit gray February freeze. No radio. Silent, concentrated calm. Just want to see Charlie's arm reach and open the passenger door. Then we can split.
John, you've just been exposed to actual art. How are you feeling?
Eric, you know I went to an art school. You know I spent a lot of time around people who consider themselves artists. I have never really thought of myself as an artist. And it's probably because normally when exposed to stuff like this, I just want to start punching people. And I just hate this so much.
Your brow was definitely furrowed in an unpleased way for the duration of that.
It's just, what are we doing? What are we doing?
So not your thing.
Not my thing.
All right. Warrior Soul mythos tells us that the actual band of that name formed directly as the result of a bet Corey Clark made with the promoter of this very same pyramid club, that he could assemble the best damn band in all of New York City if he just put his mind to it. And that, my friend, is exactly what he did, shifting his focus from performance art to composing and singing an especially artsy strain of alternative metal. And indeed, he won the bet. Clark's newly formed ensemble, Warrior Soul, would be signed to a major label record deal with Geffen in early 1988, less than a year later. Boom! Following the signing, Geffen made Clark fire most of the earliest incarnation of his backing band. The only holdover was bassist extraordinaire Pete McClanahan. For the debut album lineup, he went on to hire drummer Paul Ferguson, née of the iconic post-punk band Killing Joke, and a fabulous guitarist named John Rico, whose distinctive sonic palette would become one of the primary cornerstone of Warrior Soul's early oeuvre. John, we've got the band together. New York City has been quickly and decisively musically conquered. Warrior Soul have a major label record deal. The stage is most definitely set to start taking over the goddamned motherfucking world. Such exciting times.
April 17th, 1990. Last decade dead century.
I begin with a personal anecdote. John, do you think I'm risking the vast amount of scholarly credibility I've built up over recent years by indulging myself in a personal anecdote?
Eric, this whole fucking podcast is an indulgement. Just go with it. I'm going to stop trying to fight you.
Oh, but we have so much fun. Well, it's my Chrismukkah episode, so I'm going to allow myself to wallow in just a wee bit of Warrior Soul nostalgia. Anyhow, I first came across Warrior Soul in the same way I came across most of the good things in the early portion of my life, via MTV's legendary Headbangers Ball. Ooh! Speaking of which, John, were you aware that Patreon members have exclusive access to a Lost Heavy Metal 101 minisode featuring the two of us discussing the storied history of the Headbangers Ball?
Literally, no. When did I participate in this?
It was actually part of a totally unrelated episode, and you made me feel so bad about trying to shoehorn it in that I excised it from the episode. Now we have a minisode.
Ah, perfect.
Now, I can hardly think of a better Christmas, Hanukkah, or Kwanzaa gift for the loved ones in your life than the nice gift of a Heavy Metal 101 Patreon membership. Just $3 a month. John, doesn't that seem like a nice gift idea?
If you have people in your life that you love, don't buy them this podcast. Buy them what they want. Or better yet, just be with them and love them and be thankful that they are a part of your life. Buy yourself this podcast because you're the weirdo in the family who enjoys this.
Treat yourself. But I digress. So, I first came across Warrior Soul via Headbangers Ball specifically through the moody, gritty video for the excellent alt-metal song We Cry Out. 'Twas the summer of 1990, in those halcyon days before the grunge curtain came crashing down, and this music wasn't quite like anything I'd previously heard. It felt like something entirely new. And so, of course, as any good child of the 1990s would do, I ran out and purchased the CD. I got home, put it on, and as the album opened, I was confronted with the following immeasurably formidable lyrical introduction. I am the child of the new generation, the psychotic product of total frustration, lost in the void of the social soup. Yesterday's plans went awry. I saw you standing there cold, so I picked up on the usual topic. I feel the pain of a thousand wars. I got no problems, man. I got no problems, man. I got no problems, man. I live in TV land. I'm an electronic image beaming out to you. And my wee little 13-year-old brain was never, ever the same again. John, does this story from the annals of young Eric both inspire and move you?
No, the story of you buying a CD and listening to it.
I mean, if you want to be really granular about it, yeah, that's what it was.
You want me to tell you about the time I purchased the Shostakovich Jazz Suites on CD and listened to those and was like, wow, this kind of sucks.
Look, this is basically my superhero origin story. You should definitely be both inspired and moved. Hell, I quite possibly never would have started the world's greatest heavy metal podcast were it not for Warrior Soul. Could you even imagine?
I'd have so many more hours of my life back.
You would be missing so much quality time with me, with our fans. Anyhow, personal anecdote over. John ruined it.
He wrote that before I even spoke.
That's absolutely in the script.
You knew how lame that anecdote was as you were writing it.
No, I just know you, and you're a big grump, Krampus-esque at best. God damn it. Suffice it to say, last decade Dead Century made an extraordinary impression on me, a few rock critics, and about 7 other people, most of whom were close personal friends of mine. John, you're a close personal friend of mine. I put 2 songs from the amazing last decade Dead Century, an album which, due to Corey Clark's contentious relationship with his former label, is not currently available for streaming, on your 90s Warrior Soul Mega Mix. I included the raw, punky ripper, Downtown, and the song that was eventually chosen for the band's second MTV video, the darkly anthemic ballad, The Losers, which lyrically is something like a less nihilistic Smells Like Teen Spirit. John, my fragile emotions hang in the balance. You know, the holiday season is a tough time for Jewish Satanists like myself. But still, your candor is vastly more important than my pitiful feelings. So tell it like it is. What did you think of these 2 Teen Eric certified alt-metal bangers?
I was pretty bored by both of them. They just were very long and very repetitive and very unengaging for me. They weren't like bad. It's not like anyone sounded bad or the music was crap. It just wasn't interesting. Like The Losers is 7 minutes long and I'm pretty sure has one musical idea.
A powerfully anthemic chorus that rips your heart out, transcends reality as we know it with its trance-like beauty.
And they just keep doing it over and over for 7 minutes. It's so dull.
Well, John is famously both shifty and somewhat musically demented, so let's let our esteemed audience decide for themselves.
You're going to make them listen to this?
I sure am. I'm not going to make them do anything.
That's right. You have free will. You have free will, listeners.
If I was going to assign, hypothetically, just one song from this album to the intrepid student of metal, I think it would have to be The Losers. This is Warrior Soul at their angsty and evocative best, and it is a song everyone in the world would probably benefit from occasionally reflectively rocking out to. So let's all do that now. Pause the podcast, click the link, and climb on down into the seedy, haunted mire with Corey and the boys. John and I will see you, tear-soaked tissues clenched tightly into our balled-up fists, on the other side. What a fucking song. What a fucking song. And what a fucking album. I See the Ruins, We Cry Out, The Losers, Downtown, Trippin' on Ecstasy, even the batshit crazy spoken word piece, 4 More Years, etc., etc., etc. Everything on this album rules, and I think that it is a strong candidate for the single greatest debut in all of heavy metal history. It is my favorite metal album from what was a monumentally stacked year, 1990. If you don't know this album, I strongly advise seeking out Last Decade, Dead Century via Bandcamp or YouTube or even good old-fashioned physical media. You will not be disappointed. John is always disappointed. It's his natural state. Please try to ignore it.
I'm very happy being unhappy.
I respect that about you. It's one of your charms. Moving on!
May 3rd, 1991. Drugs, God, and the New Republic.
Time for another anecdote.
Oh, fuck. Are we doing one of these for every album?
We're going to have a lot of anecdotes today. I indulged myself a little bit on this episode. Bear with me. This was the album that made Warrior Soul my official favorite band, ripping, tearing that coveted spot away from my beloved Kiss. I had loved Last Decade, Dead Century, but Drugs, God, and the New Republic took things to the next level. And actually, the band did make some modest amount of commercial noise on MTV this time around via the album's first video, which was for the mid-tempo working man's anthem, Hero. And, just for the record, it's not actually like Warrior Soul weren't selling albums this whole time. I was exaggerating earlier. While it's true that these 90s Warrior Soul albums weren't chart hits or anything, according to Corey Clark, they were all moving about 100,000 copies each. And that's not nothing. Though the critical appraisal of their sophomore album was and is noticeably less enthusiastic than it was for the debut, I fucking love it. Songs like Rocket 88, the title track, Jump for Joy, and The Wasteland are just unbelievably great. Johnny John John, I included the super neato opening duo, Intro, flowing directly into the fabulous Joy Division cover, Inner Zone, as well as the essential Warrior Soul classic, The Wasteland, on your playlist. How did Warrior Soul circa 1991 sit with my sweet kissy co-host?
These were the 3 that I liked the most on the playlist. I liked these 3. They felt tighter, they had a clear voice, and there was a nice sound to them. Like I found nothing disagreeable about these 3 songs.
Great. It's an amazing album. These are great songs. Great songs. Great opening. Ooh, such a good opening with Intro and Inner Zone. Also of note, at this time, Warrior Soul got placed onto a big tour to support their second release, opening up for Queensryche, right in the midst of that band's world-beating Empire era. Alas, Corey Clark's fiery, passionate political rhetoric, which regularly included chants of "fuck Bush," didn't always play so well with Queensryche's audiences, and some amount of chaos and fan alienation ensued. Basically, something like any old day with your good pals at HM101, right?
I mean, we are well known for our strong, outspoken political beliefs on this podcast.
Central to our messaging. Don't blame me, I voted for Kodos. Speaking of chaos and fan alienation, let's take another listening break. Trigger warning. The following killer track, The Wasteland, contains a prescient and not at all favorable Donald Trump reference. Make of that what you will. Regardless, I do strongly advise clicking the link and rocking out to this amazing tune. John and I will be right back. God, I love this band. But John, I've got an especially great personal anecdote for album number 3. So clearly we need to move things along.
I don't even know why I'm here.
It's a very special holiday episode.
October 13th, 1992. Salutations from the Ghetto Nation.
Like children awaiting a Christmas morning or Hanukkah evening that seemingly never fucking comes, my friends and I spent months, eagerly anticipating the release of the third Warrior Soul album. The internet wasn't a meaningful thing way back in 1992, and so my very analog way of learning if a new album had been released was to swing by our closest CD store and to check if there was a new album available under a band's name. This was not terribly efficient, but back in those misty days of yore, it was all we had. John, does this sound like a primitive, strange, and confounding world to which you, as a strapping, much younger fellow, are utterly unable to relate?
Yes, but not because I grew up with the internet. It's because I grew up, again, not caring about music.
Anyhow, one lovely October day in 1992, I rode my bike over to my friend Stort's house after school. Our mutual friend, Mike, a fellow obsessed Warrior Soul fan, arrived shortly after me, and in his sweaty hand he carried, like a sacred talisman, the brand new Warrior Soul CD. Apparently, Salutations from the Ghetto Nation had at last arrived. There it was, right in front of my awestruck face. John, were you aware of the fact that at this time in human history we carried our music around physically on shiny metallic discs?
Oh yeah, baby. I had CDs.
Oh, did you have a collection?
Yeah. I had a little tower on my desk that I could put them all in.
Nice.
And then later I got a little, one of those binders you'd put in your car that you could slide them in.
Sure. I have many big binders filled with CDs I never listen to.
Yep. I still own a lot of CDs that I also never play.
Anyhow, my first response to this development was startled awe. My second response was, put it on! Put it on! Upon hearing the extraordinary, cataclysmic opening riff for the song Love Destruction, my third and final response was a maniacal outburst of staggering jealousy. How could Mike have the new Warrior Soul album but not me? And how could I possibly enjoy listening to someone else's copy surrounded by other human beings? I needed my own copy immediately, and I needed my first listen to take place in spiritually pure, focused isolation. And so, I actually stormed out in a state of envious rage. I rode home, pedaling furiously the entire way, and upon arriving, immediately begged my mother to drive me directly to the local music store so that I could purchase this new album myself. Which, bless her, she agreed to do, clearly noting the profound depths of my deeply agitated state. Of course, I didn't actually have any cash money on hand at the time, and so I, Eric Schwartz, future internationally renowned heavy metal scholar, ended up paying for my copy of the third Warrior Soul album, Salutations from the Ghetto Nation, by using a ragtag collection of coins hoisted from my piggy bank. I often still think of that poor teenaged clerk who had to count up my vast mess of coinage. I salute you, long-forgotten retail employee. I also salute you, long-suffering mother of mine who drove her belligerent teenage son to the store on that fall day. And lastly, I salute you, Corey Clark, for releasing on October 12th, 1992, the single best Warrior Soul album of them all. John, how'd you like my story? Teen angst, jealousy, rage, an amusing conclusion that saw a beleaguered, pimple-faced young clerk dutifully counting up an assortment of pennies, nickels, and dimes so that I could make my purchase. Does all of this cause you to see young Eric in an entirely new light?
I mean, it's a very entertaining story. It's a weird reaction.
Really was. I can't justify it. I have no justification. It was weird. I agree.
But I can see it. I'm picturing like one of those kids from The Sandlot having that reaction. Like that's kind of how it's playing out in my mind.
You know, I've never actually seen The Sandlot.
You've never seen The Sandlot? Oh, it's good.
I know it's where the You're Killing Me Smalls came from.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
Unfortunately, as artistically spectacular as this album was, it failed to build on whatever commercial momentum the band had accrued via Drugs, God, and the New Republic. I can only recall actually seeing the video for Love Destruction on MTV just once, and Corey Clark's always contentious relationship with his label, Geffen, began to completely fall apart, as he blamed them for not properly promoting the record. As such, although they were making some of the best music of their careers at the time, the release of Salutations would seem to mark the beginning of the end of the golden era of Warrior Soul's career. But this was one hell of a fucking peak. Listener, I beg you, Give Warrior Soul a chance if you have not yet done so. In fact, let's all do that now via the aforementioned momentous opening track of this masterful third album, Love Destruction. Pause the show, click the link, and enjoy reflecting back on a red-faced, wildly jealous teenaged Eric in the midst of a preposterous meltdown as the direct result of how fucking great this song is. We will be right back. So what, maggot? You rock star moron, you make me vomit. Now pass the bourbon. I don't take shit. I bow to no one. Don't pledge allegiance to flags. I burn them. John, I feel as though with this lyric, Corey Clark has perfectly encapsulated your deepest inner feelings from any given HM101 recording session. It's so good. What did you think? Isn't this just so damn good?
I'm going to be really honest. This song made me think of another song, and I spent the entire time trying to remember what that other song was and didn't really pay much attention to this song.
Perfect.
Yes.
Well, it's a good fucking song. Damn it. But wait. There's just a bit more classic lineup, Warrior Soul goodness to come. You see, Corey Clark, who by now wanted desperately to extricate himself from his record deal with Geffen, still had contractual obligations he could not get himself out of. What would result from these challenging times would be a strange, uneven, and often absolutely incredible release.
September 25, 1993. Chill Pill.
Chill Pill is a very good album that was presented to the listening public in a very bad way. Both the band's label, Geffen, who provided absolutely no promotion, but also Clark himself, were at fault. You see, upon Chill Pill's release, a belligerent Clark put out the word that this was an artsy-fartsy experimental record specifically designed to fail in order to get revenge upon Geffen for having done such a shitty job of handling the band. John, would you agree that telling your fans that you're only releasing your new album in order to get back at your label is hardly an ideal way to generate enthusiasm?
Depends on who your fans are.
Mm.
There's a certain population of people who would probably love that idea.
I might have counted myself amongst those people, but still, thought it was a little weird. Now, for the record, it's kind of like how I'm actually only doing this particular podcast episode in order to appease the small group of close friends I had growing up who were all mutually obsessed with Warrior Soul. Hi, guys! Anti-commercialism, J-Rock. That is the order of the day.
Yeah!
Retrospectively, however, Corey Clark does speak highly of this album, and so do I. While I will freely admit that it is the weakest of the band's magnificent 90s output, it is still very, very good, and songs like Song in Your Mind, Ha Ha Ha, and Soft are just about as great as anything else from their hallowed early catalog. John, I included the dreamy, psychedelic Song in Your Mind from this album.
I've seen it all before. Turn your life in for gold. It reaches down to my soul. The taste of dust and devil.
Whew, good stuff. Did this song make you hallucinate beautifully but sadly?
No, I was driving, so I stayed pretty lucid.
Good, that's for the best.
It's definitely very different from the preceding material. Like, just a lot of sounds that we had not heard before. And I don't know that they were the sounds I particularly was looking for.
Fuck you!
I mean, I think the sonic palette of Chill Pill is pretty fabulous, but it might not be for everybody.
Sure, Eric, you like a lot of shit.
Yeah. Now, I suppose now might be as good a time as any to note that by albums number 3 and 4, Corey Clark's lovely, unique, and always somewhat raspy voice had noticeably begun to coarsen. This is something that has become an increasingly major issue for him as the 21st century has worn on. But at the point of Chill Pill, his vocals still had a nice balance of their earlier idiosyncratic mellifluousness alongside a strained, emotive rawness that communicated emotion really effectively. Actually, John, I'm curious, what do you think of Corey Clark's voice in these various tracks? He's got a very unique voice.
Yeah, I didn't hate the sung stuff. I found some of it kind of typically hard to understand, but it's not offensive like that spoken word thing you made us listen to earlier.
Anyhow, regardless of anything else, Chill Pill would mark the end of an era in multiple ways. Firstly, the band was indeed dropped by Geffen following this release, and unfortunately, the expected quick re signing to an alternate major label deal never came to fruition. Secondly, in the midst of what was clearly a transitional period, Clark decided that a fresh start was warranted, and so the entire band, other than longtime bassist Pete McClanahan, was jettisoned. The great John Rico was replaced by a guitarist who went only by the name X Factor. John, would you be okay if I started going by the name E Factor?
I know this is an audio medium and people can't see the face I'm making, but
It's not a good face. It's a spoken word face. It's John's spoken word face.
I just,
Mhm.
I need you to know you are neither shitty enough or cool enough to have the name E Factor.
All right. I'll take that as both a compliment and an insult, as I'm sure it was intended.
It's just how I see the world, Eric.
All right. All right. I was just checking. I'll think about it. No decisions have been made. Now, drummer Mark Evans, who had replaced Paul Ferguson following the debut album, was replaced by Scott Du Bois. Trigger warning time. We've got some violent crime to discuss. You see, as we have reached the point of Evans' departure from Warrior Soul, I suppose now is as good a time as any to mention his extraordinarily sad, not at all Christmassy end. Mark Evans was murdered in London in 2005, and his burning body was found stashed in a trash can in a car park. 3 people were eventually charged, though most other details appear not to be publicly available. John, that's just about the most awful thing ever, no?
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up, buddy.
Oh, this is definitely the segment in the Behind the Music episode wherein everything gets all dark and horrible for the band. Meanwhile, back in the 1990s, whilst tripping on acid, Corey Clark cut off his signature long, luxurious locks, leading to the new Warrior Soul lineup going with more of a cyberpunk rather than heavy metal visual aesthetic. Although, as mentioned, all efforts at major label deals fell through, Warrior Soul 2.0 eventually were signed to the London-based independent label Music for Nations and released, kinda sort of, their final album of the 20th century.
July 18th, 1994. The Space Age Playboys.
John! This may surprise you, but I have a personal anecdote associated with this album. Does that surprise you?
I wish you did.
You're feeling nostalgic about the timeline format rather than the personal anecdote format, aren't you?
I got a lot of feelings. I
respect that. We're going to get through this, buddy. You and me, together. We're almost there. Almost to the promised land. You see, by the time that the Space Age Playboys was released, my youthful, wandering musical eye had wandered fairly far afield. I was increasingly involved in musical theater, which was taking ever more of my time and attention. I'd also begun regularly attending raves and listening to a not insignificant amount of shitty 90s electronica. And perhaps most importantly, the March 1994 release of Nine Inch Nails' masterpiece, The Downward Spiral, had assured that band the coveted spot at the tippy top of my favorite bands list, thereby casting Warrior Soul downward a few notches. And as always, back in that information dark age, I didn't really know what all the fuck might be going on with Warrior Soul at the time. Still, my deeply ingrained habit of always checking out the Warrior Soul section at my local CD store for new releases remained. So imagine my delight one fine day in the fall of 1994 when I unexpectedly came across the Space Age Playboys album. I mean, I was sort of delighted. Actually, I was also immediately a bit concerned. The album just looked sort of cheap. It just didn't look like a Warrior Soul album. For the first time ever, there was a band photo on the cover, but the dudes on the cover didn't really look anything like the Warrior Soul I knew and loved. Even Corey Clark looked weird with his newly shorn hair, and I really had no clue who the fuck the rest of those dudes were. Something was rotten in the state of Denmark. But of course, I still immediately purchased the album, this time with actual cash money, I brought it home, I put it on, and I can't lie, John, I freaked out. I completely freaked out. The fuck was this? To my still young, fragile 1994 ears, this did not sound like the Warrior Soul I knew and I loved. And John, I have a truly dark thing to confess. Are you ready to hear my confession, Father McKeever?
Go on.
I was so bothered, so deeply unsettled by the new look and sound of this band, which had always meant so much to me, that no, I can't say it. John, I'm going to need you to read my great personal shame into the HM101 record.
And on that very same day upon which young Eric purchased the Warrior Soul album, the Space-Aged Playboys, he drove back to the store and returned it.
I'm worthless scum. I don't know what it is about Warrior Soul that has always brought out my emotional side. Clearly, this was a strange and silly response, but that is precisely what I did. John, are you utterly scandalized by this betrayal of my beloved hero, Corey Clark, returning his new album after just one listen?
I wasn't aware that was the thing you could do.
Yeah, I must have been a store policy. It's a good point. But yeah, you could do that.
Like, did you get your money back?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Maybe I'm misremembering.
Wow.
Yeah, I think so. Retrospectively, what makes all of this even weirder upon listening back to the Space Age Playboys as an adult is, number one, it's a fantastic album. It really is actually one of Warrior Soul's strongest albums, top to bottom. And number two, to my 21st century ears, it honestly doesn't sound all that different from any of the other classic Warrior Soul albums. Really, it's just another fantastic 90s Warrior Soul masterpiece. I don't know what the fuck was wrong with me. John, any ideas?
I've been told you're not supposed to try and psychoanalyze other people if you're not actually a therapist.
Ah, smart. A shrewd response. HM101 HR is going to be very happy with your refusal to get in the weeds with me.
And I live to please HR departments.
I know you do. The Space Age Playboys album and I have long since made amends with each other. When I finally got my chance to see Warrior Soul live, which was incredible, at a small club in New York City in 2008, the song they played that I didn't really know at the time that most stuck out to me as amazing was Let's Get Wasted, which is the third track off of the Space Age Playboys. It was that experience which led to my finally coming back around to this album and giving it another chance, and I have loved it ever since. I'm sorry, Corey. I fucked up. I suck. In honor of my belated realization, let's have us one final Warrior Soul listening break. Pause the podcast, take 5 to 6 shots of well whiskey, maybe light up a joint, and then click the Let's Get Wasted link in the show notes. John and I will be back on the other side, high as balls, to wrap up our Warrior Soul discussion. John, as you too are a tragic hippaholic, and also someone who is currently utterly and completely fucking wasted, I'm curious about how you felt about this punky, catchy, scream-along anthem.
It definitely felt... How do I put this? I see both sides of what you were saying in that it still sounds like the same band, but it also sounds a little different. Not drastically different, but it sounds a little more... You used the right word in your description, like punk. Mm-hmm. It feels more in that vein than in the vein of the previous songs.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. Now, I haven't explicitly mentioned this yet, but actually starting on album number 3, Salutations from the Ghetto Nation, via killer songs like Punk and Belligerent and Ass Kicking, which I did not include on your playlist, overt punk elements had increasingly filtered into Warrior Soul's sonic stew of musical influences. And that influence does come just a bit more to the fore on the Space Age Playboys. Corey Clark has described the sound of this album as, quote, acid punk. But to me, this is really just more of Warrior Soul sounding like Warrior Soul, and while it did freak out my delicate 17-year-old sensibilities, it all sounds absolutely fucking great to me these days.
Can I ask a stupid question?
Yes.
Obviously, punk is its own distinct genre, but does it fit into the metal oeuvre at all?
It definitely depends on who you talk to. There are some who would describe punk as a subgenre of metal. I don't think that's true. But my own personal thought is that they come from the same fundamental teenage rebellion, turn it up as loud as possible, get the angst out ethos, but that the actual musical results and the sort of culture surrounding the two genres is different enough that they are technically separate things, even though they do bleed together a lot. That's my 2 cents.
All right.
Alrighty then. Closing out the story of Warrior Soul in the 1990s looks something like this. Corey Clark's longtime partner in crime, bassist Pete McClanahan, who passed away in 2022, rest in peace, quit following the conclusion of the Space Age Playboys tour, and Corey Clark decided it was time for a truly fresh start. He broke up the band, relocated to Los Angeles, and started a new group under the name Space Age Playboys. One last 90s Warrior Soul album, a collection of previously unreleased tracks from across their career called Odds and Ends in the US, and, rather delightfully, Fucker in the UK, came out in 1996. John, are you an Odds and Ends guy or a Fucker guy?
It's just how, those are so different.
It's weird. I mean, Odds and Ends tells you what's in the box, because it's just a collection of odds and ends from across their career.
Yeah.
Fucker's fun, though.
Sure.
All right. We'll call you flexible. It's definitely a worthwhile addition to any Warrior Soul lover's collection, but this marked the true end of Warrior Soul for the remainder of the 20th century. But not forever, John. No, sir. Warrior Soul would indeed arise from the ashes in the 21st century. But that, my friend, is a story for another time. John, I got my holiday gift. I got to wallow in all sorts of warm, hazy, teen Eric nostalgia and discuss one of my all-time favorite bands. But don't worry, I got something for you as well. You see, folks, long ago, I promised John that on some future December episode, we would spend some time discussing a subject I think is near and dear to his heart. Christmas music. John, you, generally speaking, like Christmas music, no?
I do. I feel like when I was making this request, I was envisioning an entire episode around this subject as opposed to 5 shoddy minutes at the end of a nostalgia trip. But hey, I guess I'll take what I can get.
Merry Christmas. Now, I describe my relationship to holiday music as relatively indifferent.
Well, Eric, that's because of the two of us, I am clearly the more joyful and happy individual.
Right. That makes sense. It makes sense to me that you would surround yourself with Mariah Carey from the morning to the night once the nights get longer and the weather gets cooler and all that stuff. I get it. It's totally you. Totally you. Now, having said that, I do love heavy metal. And if I have to listen to holiday-themed music, as oft I have to do, it might as well be heavy metal holiday music. And as 'tis the season, I thought we might close off this episode by offering just a few fun heavy metal listening suggestions for those looking to have a very metal Chrismukkah. John, doesn't that sound like a good time?
Oh boy.
This one's for you, buddy. Merry Christmas. All right. My absolute number one go-to pick for holiday season listening is King Diamond's iconic No Presents for Christmas. Like the mighty king himself, I too am dreaming not of a white Christmas, but rather of a white Sabbath. And this song just scratches my seasonal metal itch like no other. So John, I put No Presents for Christmas onto your playlist. Whatever did you make of this delightful, irreverent slab of holiday cheer?
I mean, it was a lot. This song was a lot. It was just so aggressive for Christmas.
That's so fun! It's fun! Tom and Jerry sipping sherry?
Yeah, okay, sure.
It's fun! Joy! Joyeux Noël! Anyway, We actually discussed this song back on our season number 3, King Diamond-centric Halloween Spooktacular. I'm assuming John remembers absolutely nothing of that, so just a reminder.
I was honestly trying to remember if we've talked about King Diamond, period.
Oh my fucking god. I hate you. I just hate you. You and your stupid brain. God damn it. You've ruined Chrismukkah. Oh, John is now convulsing in fits of joy. John is having his best Chrismukkah ever.
This has been the present for me.
All right. John is happy. So I'm happy. Now look, this was actually the very first post-Merciful Fate King Diamond song that was released. Both artists we've talked about. As a non-album single on December 25th, 1985. That is nearly 3 months prior to the release of the majestic debut full-length, Fatal Portrait. I absolutely think some official assigned King Diamond listening is necessary to truly get us into the holiday spirit. Listeners, pause the podcast one last time. Maybe grab yourselves a bit of sherry, and then click the link in the show notes so that you can rock out to the single greatest Christmas metal classic of all time, King Diamond's No Presents for Christmas. Hell yes! Now that there song actually does make me feel just a bit of the true Chrismukkah spirit. I think that my heart may have just grown 3 sizes after listening. If anything can save the holiday season from Hallmark movie mundanity, it's obviously King fucking Diamond, right, John?
Sure.
Now that's about as good as it gets, but I do have just a few other suggestions for John and or HM101 fans looking to add more metal to their seasonal listening. Here goes. The 2008 compilation album, We Wish You a Metal Xmas and a Headbanging New Year, is definitely a ton of fun, featuring a bunch of trad and glam metal superstars. The best of the bunch, in my estimation, is a dark and doomy take on God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, as performed by Ronnie James Dio, Tony Iommi, Rudy Sarzo, and Simon Wright. John, you can't tell me that a Dio Iommi Christmas doesn't sound like a good time for all involved, right?
It's an interesting proposition for sure.
Now, you're going to love this one. Were you aware that the late, great horror icon Christopher Lee, at the not-so-tender age of 90, released the EP, A Heavy Metal Christmas, in December 2012? John, you cannot tell me you aren't enticed by the idea of Saruman himself singing over heavy metal arrangements of Christmas classics, right?
I have actually heard bits and pieces of this before.
Ah, okay. So compelling is this that you have actually come across it before.
Its reach is so far that it has come to me, the least metal-aware person in the world.
Ah, Christopher Lee. Hell of a motherfucker. It is definitely a lot of fun. And he actually released a sequel in 2013. Rest in peace, ya badass motherfucker. Now, for our Jewish friends, the big-ticket holiday metal item is the 2009 album Hanukkah Gone Metal by the NYC-based traditional metal band Gods of Fire. It really is a pretty cool album, with a nice mix of traditional and original tunes. It's always nice to see Hanukkah get just a wee bit of love at this otherwise highly Christmas-dominated time of year. Also of note, the scrappy, beloved Canadian classic metal barbarians of Anvil have a recording of the seasonal classic Hanukkah O Hanukkah. John, I'm wondering, do you feel as passionately about Hanukkah music as you do about Christmas music?
I don't feel as passionately about anything as I do Christmas music.
Wow. I'm going to make that my December ringtone. John just deadpanning that statement. All right. It's about time to be wrapping things up so John and I can get ready in earnest for our annual winter hibernation period of too much booze and too much food. But before we go, just a few final seasonal albums of particular note. Twisted Sister more or less got the whole Christmas metal ball a-rolling via their 2006 release, A Twisted Christmas. Like most of Twisted Sister's oeuvre, I'm not entirely sure if I could describe the album as good, So much is a good time that makes me smile. I can certainly think of worse things than that. John, good time, make you smile? It's okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not great. It was fun.
Like this podcast.
Like the podcast, you fucker. Bastard. The album also includes guest vocal performances by two of our great metal queens, Lita Ford and Doro Pesch. And I really would suggest it as something of a Christmas metal essential. A classic, if you will. And last but not least, one of the greatest metal artists of them all, the extraordinary lead shrieker for the mighty Judas Priest, Rob Halford, has shown a penchant for holiday music in this latter portion of his career. Firstly, with Halford, his excellent side project working aside producer/guitarist Roy Z, he released Halford 3, Winter Songs, in 2009. And then, 10 years later, in 2019, he released another seasonal themed album entitled Celestial, this time as a solo project. You know, for my money, if you're gonna listen to Christmas music, it probably should be sung by either Ronnie James Dio or Rob Halford. It's just my opinion. That is all I've got to say about that. Happy holidays, beloved friend of mine. Did you enjoy your gift of holiday metal?
Sure.
Are you gonna actually listen to any of that?
Probably not.
Oh man, I could see you and your loved ones gathered around a fire, playing We Wish You a Metal Xmas, rocking out with Ronnie and the boys. Like, I think that'd be a good vibe. I think you'd really enjoy yourself. Twisted Sister. You just think about it.
I'll think about it.
Okay. And to all of you out there in podcast land, regardless of what you celebrate this time of year, or whether you celebrate anything at all, I think that we can all agree that listening to heavy metal is awesome. So let's all try to do more of that in the new year. That will be time well spent. John, it's time for us to be signing off for the very last time in the year of our Lord, 2024. Aww. Do you have any holiday wishes or seasonal thoughts you'd like to share with our nice listeners?
Hey, if you like the podcast, leave us a like, a review, and share on any of your social media platforms.
You're a fucking monster is what you are. Just a monster. Thanks for listening, everybody. We love you bunches and bunches. Have yourselves a fantastic end of the year, and John and I will see you all again, refreshed, reinvigorated, and probably wildly hungover, for a Heavy Metal 101 2025 to remember. Bye!